Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk about beans. And mostly it's going to be about the varieties that I grow and why, what I've tried, what works for me, so on and so forth. So let's get to this topic. So you can see behind me here, these are my dry beans so far from the garden. But as of the time I'm shooting this video, I've got tons more out there to gather. So these ones here are ones I still got to shell. I just brought them in to show you. Some of these I need to actually let dry a little bit more. The crazy thing about this year is it's the first late summer that we've had. I mean, not only late starting summer, that's been getting later and later every year, which means we've had nice, dry, warm days for things to continue growing. Thus, I still have beans coming in. What you see here might be about a quarter of the amount of dry beans I'm going to get out of my garden this year, maybe a third tops. So because there's so much more still to get. So the beans that I'm showing you right here are all runner beans. There's 3 different varieties in here, though it's hard to tell the difference. I can tell the difference between them when I look closely. And I'll show you some close-up pictures. But what I have here are the scarlet runners, which makes up most of these. The Barnside Sweet, which looks just like the scarlet runner, same color flower, except for the bean itself gets bigger. The bean inside and the bean pod gets bigger, and the plant as a whole just gets bigger. And then there are the sunset runners. So I can tell right there that one's a sunset runner because the color in the bean itself is kind of a peach color, whereas the scarlet runners have just a little bit of a purpley color to them. I don't know if you can tell that, but here's a close-up here so you can see the difference. Now, the sunset runners I really like because they add more color to the garden. So aside from the nice vibrancy of the dark orange flowers on the scarlet and Barnside Sweet runners, these ones add that color, that nice peach color as well. But aside from the color of the flowers and the slight variation in color of the beans, there's no difference between the scarlet and the sunset runners. And so the reason I keep growing these is not only are they a great dual purpose bean, because if you pick them while they're young, maybe only about that long and maybe that wide, you don't want them to get too mature, but if you pick them young enough, they're a great green bean. So when they first start growing and I first start getting those beans in, that's when I start canning up the green beans. And then once I get the amount of green beans I want canned up, the rest I allow to just grow and sit on the vine. And the pods, you can't really tell as well now because when they dry up, they look a lot smaller. But they get quite big. So here's what they look like while they're growing and before they start to dry. So yeah, I just leave them out there. Now, because we've had a dry fall so far, I've actually been able to pick most of my beans right off the vines dry like this. So as I see them coming in dry every day, go out there and pick some more. And then in the evening, I'll sit and shell them. But normally what I have to do is by now our heavy rains have returned, even some of our stormier weather. So normally what I'm doing by now is that the tomatoes and cucumbers would be done in the greenhouse. So I'd just be taking the whole plants, pulling them out and hanging them in the greenhouse to dry, as you can see in these images here. That's normally what I do this time of the year because, you know, the tomatoes and cucumbers are typically out of the way by then, and I can then have plenty of space to just hang those beans and let them dry and then just go get them when I'm ready. So that works great because a greenhouse is a nice dry place to do that. But it has actually been nice being able to see the beans, get them while they're drying on the plants while I still have fresh green beans coming in. So I'm going to keep doing that as long as I am able, but once those rains return, I'm going to start pulling whatever's left, taking them into the greenhouse to dry because it's a perfect place to dry them. So if you're not growing anything in your greenhouse and you're doing beans of any kind, that's one way to do it. Or if you have space in your garage or any kind of other outbuilding, someplace where it stays dry enough, you can allow your beans to dry there. Another way to do it would be the leather britches is the old-fashioned way you can allow your beans to dry and that would involve, I'll put a picture here, but you know, say you got your beans, they're still green, is you just stack them like so. You crisscross and you just keep going all the way up. And then you just take a needle and thread it right through there and then hang them to dry. So you can have strings of beans hanging everywhere. Not my personal choice. I preference not just the extra time it takes to do that, but just I don't want all that stuff hanging all over my house. So it's easier for me to just go ahead and hang them in the greenhouse. So this is the main bean that I grow. And the reason why I always keep doing these beans is because they here in rain country, it's the one bean that I've tried many beans of all different varieties, and I'll keep trying. I'm not going to give up trying new ones, but out of all the ones I've tried, these ones always do the best for me. They're very prolific. They make clusters of beans, and I love them. And that the fact that they're dual purpose, so that you don't have to just use them as a dry bean. You can use them as a green bean when they're picked younger. Not all beans are like that. Now, all beans can be used as a dry bean from what I've seen. Any bean can be used as a dry bean if you just let it finish growing and then dry out. But not all beans can be used as a green bean. So that's where you get the dual purpose. So it's great when you can get a dual purpose bean, and that's what this is. So to me, this takes care of a lot of things. It's prolific. It gives me green beans for a vegetable, and then I've got my dry beans that I can use for making chili or add to soup or making refried beans or anything like that. Anything you're going to use beans in. And it adds beauty to the garden. So runner beans are similar to a pole bean. In fact, I don't really even know the difference between a pole bean and a runner bean, unless it's just different names for the same thing. But that means I can also save space in my garden. Bush beans don't really do good for us anyway. I've never had bush beans do great. I've tried several different of those. And if it's not for the fact that they're lower to the ground and so the slugs will devour them, they just don't do near as well as the runner beans do, because they will climb on anything. So here are some tips if you consider doing any kind of pole bean or runner bean. Is a lot of people know, like the Three Sisters method. You grow your corn, you plant your beans around them. And yes, you can do that. For us, the timing doesn't work out quite as well on the beans and the corn, because the corn just takes so dang long to grow. But it works for me to grow them around my sunflowers and my marshmallow plants. But I do have one main section just for beans. That's just where we put some horse fencing up, and I grow most of my beans there, but I'll also grow them anywhere I possibly can. This year, I planted them in the pot, some because I had some extras I'd soaked in the pot out here on the deck that has my little fig plant in it, and I grew some beans on there. I've grown it around my apple tree, my peach tree. And even though my peach tree has only, in the many years we've had it, given us 2 peaches, and that whole time they were delicious, at least it's been a great thing for me to use as a trellis for growing beans on. And I also grow them in pots wherever I can. So I have a pot on each side of my greenhouse front corner, and they'll grow, and I have chains hanging down that they'll grow up those. And this year, the ones that are close to the section where I grow, where my grapevines and blackberries are, and then I have a plum tree in a pot, they actually grew up into the plum tree through the grapevines and everything. So I've got beans hanging all over the place out there. And usually the first ones that start to grow are the ones that I plant in pots on my deck. And those ones will do really great. They don't give me near as many beans as the ones that come in later out in the main garden sections, but they still are something. I can still get a couple of dinners at least worth of beans out of there. So the runner beans will always be my top favorite bean, at least always have been. Well, I don't know that I'll ever find one I like as much as these, but what I'm hoping, I have high hopes for this one here. And one of the stores I ordered seeds from, because now I order all my seeds from different Etsy vendors based in the US, usually try to look for people that are at least in a similar climate. Which, by the way, I wanted to point this out earlier, is our climate, even though we're 8B, which is the same as Deep South Homestead, that's only zone. Okay, that only refers to hardiness zone. Our climate is incredibly different from theirs. We have a much shorter growing season. We're much cooler, and we're very, very, very much wetter, because we're one of the wettest places in the United States at 120 to 160 inches of annual rainfall Look that up if you're curious and compare it. If you think you've got a lot of rain, go ahead and do that comparison, and just know that we live very close to a rainforest, so that should give you a good idea. So I want to put that out there, so if anyone else lives in pretty rainy areas, you at least know these will do good for you. They do good in dry areas too. So anyway, one of the Etsy vendors I bought from had sent me 5 of these little black beans, and so you can see them here, but I'll go ahead and put some pictures too. And these are called the Cherokee Black Trail of Tears runner beans, or pole beans. I've seen it called both. 5 little beans, and I love the size of them and the color and the fact that they're climbers. So I planted all 5. I got a couple of plants. They didn't do great, but they gave me enough, so I still have a couple here. They're dry. I just got to shell them. I just haven't shelled them yet, so I can show you what they look like when they're dry. They're actually red when they're on the vine, and when they start drying, the pod turns more of a black color, and then the bean inside itself is actually a black bean. So I'll be shelling the last of these and then saving these to plant next year. And what I'm hoping, since, like with a lot of things, since I grew these here this year, they should be more acclimated. So I'm hoping that next year I can get a lot more beans out of this, because it would be nice to have another variety, like a smaller bean. As you can see, these are a bigger size bean. And if you're talking about the Barnside Sweet, which is, I'm pretty sure that's one there, they can get pretty huge, and some people might not like that as much for chili and such. You might like a smaller bean. Well, these of course are black beans, so not what I would typically use for chili, but these would be a good soup bean, and I really hope to do good with these, because a bean like this I wouldn't care for so much in just a soup. A smaller bean is what I prefer in a soup. So I'm really hoping these will do good. Now, the other bean that I'm not really sure why I didn't plant it this year, if I simply forgot, or I just decided to focus on these and then the new beans I was trying, which were these and the rattlesnake beans, which I got nothing from. They didn't do anything for me. Everybody goes on about how great rattlesnake beans are. They didn't do anything. They didn't even germinate for me. Danny wanted to send me these really beautiful looking lima beans. I think they were called a Christmas lima bean. And they were beautiful, but I think I might have got a couple to germinate, but that's as far as it went. But anyway, back to the other bean that I usually really like to grow is the purple potted pole bean. That was the first bean that I had tried that did really good for me. And then it was later I started doing these, and these did even better. So, and especially in the last couple of years, these have done better than the purple potted pole beans, because we've had cooler, shorter summers, and those ones take longer to germinate and grow than these ones do. So for a shorter growing season, these grow faster, so these are better. But I still love those purple potted pole beans. They're definitely a great chili bean because of their size, or that they're not tiny, but they're more the size of like a pinto bean and the color of a pinto bean. But you use them as a green bean, so same idea. They're great dual purpose bean, because you pick them when they're young and they're purple, and when you cook them they turn green, so they're a great green bean. So I've usually will can those up right along with these, and once they're canned up, you can't tell the difference in the jar. But they're a beautiful bean. They get pretty purple flowers on them, and the leaves are darker. They're a deeper shade of green. So I do really like to grow those, and I'm going to grow them again next year. And I'm really bummed I didn't go ahead and plant them. But I remember there was another bean I was wanting to try and focus on this year, because our neighbor just right across the street, kitty corner to us, he grew these beans last year, and they were very, very prolific. So I thought, oh, he grew them. They were prolific. He just lives right there. And now this is the next season out, and I should be able to take these beans and they'll do great for me, and they're a climber. Well, I only just finally got beans on those. It took, because our summer started so late, our spring was so very cold. Even though these finally germinated and did great, those ones, they started growing, they got this tall, and they stayed there for a couple of months. Finally, I had a couple of them that climbed and shot off a few beans, but I'm not going to waste my space with those again. And I'm really bummed I didn't mix them up with other beans. The main reason I didn't was because I wanted to make sure I knew what was growing where. So once I know how to recognize a bean when it's growing, I don't mind mixing them together. So usually I'll mix my purple potted beans right in with my runner beans when I'm growing them. So I'll just grow them right beside each other. But every year it's these ones that come up first and produce first, and then the purple ones will start growing among them. So for me, those two are my favorites. I have also grown dragon tongue beans, and those were fun, but the slugs really love those. And as far as I know, they're only in a bush bean, but they're such a pretty bean with the color of them. And I tried growing them again after that, and I couldn't even get them to germinate. I've tried pinto beans. I've tried Adzuki beans. I tried again this year thinking if I grew them in a covered area, they would grow for me. Nope. I think they germinated and got that tall, and that was it, even in a covered area. I just keep coming back to what the tried and true is to me. Just keep in mind, your climate's going to determine what kind of bean or squash or tomato or pepper is going to grow best for you. So don't get discouraged. Just keep trying. But one of the reasons when I started this channel, I didn't feel like I could teach anybody anything new. But then I realized as I was working through overcoming the challenges of our unique climate with so much rain, that I did have stuff that I can share with people, because especially if it's someone who, like me, grew up in a dry climate and then moved to a very wet climate, you're going to be facing some totally new things when it comes to putting in a garden. Things are going to be very different, and what grows well for you in a wet climate is going to be very different than what did best for you in the dry climate you came from, and vice versa. So I figured it was worth it to go ahead and share a lot of this information. The runner beans, scarlet runner, sunset runner, barnside sweet runner, the best growing bean for our area. But there are other beans that will still do good. But even in your own little backyard, it could just be like me and the neighbor over here. You might find something what does good for them might not do as good for you, and vice versa. So don't give up trying something new, but also, especially now, definitely keep sticking with the things that you know you can get production out of. And I know I can get production out of these. It seems like no matter what our season is like, so far, I've still been doing good. And in fact, I think this year I'm going to get the most beans out of these plants than I've ever got before, which I was actually afraid I wasn't because of how cold and late our summer came on. But I stuck with it, and I'm glad I did. So anyway, that's all I wanted to share. So hopefully some people, especially if you live in a climate like mine, might get some ideas of a bean to try if you haven't yet. And if you're interested in buying some, I'll be selling some of them this year, but I'm probably going to keep it limited, even though I'll have a lot, because I really want to put up a lot of these anyway. But also what I would like is please share your favorite bean to grow. Is it a dual purpose bean? Is it high producers? What is your climate? So people, when they're reading through that, they'll know the difference. Don't just give zones, because that only refers to hardiness again. Do you live in a hot, dry climate? Do you have a long season, a short season? So on and so forth. These are important facts for people to understand when they're considering putting in a garden or trying something new. And I also hope you found this video helpful, and don't forget to read those comments down below. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.